right, let's get into transitions and how to move our gun quickly and efficiently from target to target in a competition or real life context, and is there any difference? The first thing we need to talk about with transitions is our eyes. If we look at a target that we want to get a sight picture on, it's very natural for us to look at the target first and then bring our sights up on target and switch our focal plane from the target back to our sights in an iron sight context. But for some reason, when we start doing target transitions, we're glued to our sights as we move across. And that's going to slow us down and make it very inefficient, and likely what happens is we'll move past the target and then move back because we weren't tracking the object to move our sights to it. What we want to try to get out of the habit of is being glued onto our sights. When we draw out on our first sight picture, it's okay to come off of our sights for many different things. Again, prior to obtaining our first sight picture with our firearm, we were looking at the target and we brought our gun to the target, which is quicker and more efficient than looking down at our sights in our holster and then bringing our sights up to the target. So for that same reason, when we're doing target transitions, we want to use our eyeballs first to ensure that we have a point of reference that we're going to bring the gun to. In the tactical world, you might see a little bit of a different perspective, where some of the philosophy is to always keep your sight picture and to be checking your work through your sights. You've likely seen this at a range before or on a video, where someone will put some rounds on target and then follow them down to the ground before coming back in, eyes off sight. This is entirely context dependent, but we don't want to train ourselves into one mentality where we're always going to be tracking through our sights. Being buried in our sights also brings up a multitude of other issues in regards to our situational awareness and how much the context of the situation can change while we're hiding behind those sights. Or the cost of time in regards to bringing our gun back up from a head up posture onto sights. Just like flicking a manual safety off of a carbine or 1911 as we're developing our sight picture doesn't cost us time, in the same manner, the decision-making process of delivering a follow-up round on target and placing our finger on the trigger to do so will be the time to bring our gun up. The time delay in a simple decision-making scenario is about 0.2 to 0.25 seconds, which is also about the same amount of time it takes us to put our finger back on the trigger and deliver a round. Meaning that placing our finger back on the trigger as our sights come back on target isn't costing us time, but it is benefiting us in the situational awareness department. Once we start training these target transitions, you'll be able to use that experience and apply it to a real life or competition setting to see when it's beneficial for you to take your eyes off of your sights. And it's likely going to be a majority of the time that you'll see it is beneficial to do so. Remember, however, if you're running an optic on your pistol, your eyes are the sights. We're looking at the target we want to shoot, and we're superimposing that red dot over the target. Meaning with an optic, you're not having to deal with that focal plane shift as you're moving between target arrays. Remember though, even with iron sights, shooters have a tremendous success by doing a target-focused sight picture. The more we train these target transitions, the more you'll see you can get away with in terms of your sight picture and where your focal plane is for iron sights. We're going to get out to the range in a moment, but first I want to show you what the gun is looking like during the transition, and then we're going to show you what the body's doing on the range. Before I start blasting these, I want to talk about the dead space. That's this area between the targets where nothing's happening. We want to move through this area as fast as possible. If we have two targets here that need to be shot immediately and the clock is working against us, whether that's in real life or in competition, it's beneficial for us to put rounds into both targets as fast as possible. Meaning even in a real life context, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to place rounds on target number one and stay there checking our work through our sights if we still have a target present here that is shooting at us or coming towards us with some type of lethal threat. Now this relies on the context of having two targets immediately available that both require a round. In a real life context, this is an extremely bad day to have to do a target transition where we've made the decision to fire on two targets. Now you have to also remind yourself that if we've placed rounds into target number one and target number two changes their behavior, it is no longer a lethal threat, then we have to be able to consciously change our decision to fire in that dead space coming over to target number two. That doesn't, however, mean that we should slow down on target number one or slow down on the transition through the dead space to picking up our sight picture on number two. If, however, in some horrible scenario, we do have to place rounds into two targets, it does make sense for us to do that as quickly as possible, moving from target to target and placing rounds into both targets as quick as we can. And remember, target transitions are about obtaining sight pictures quickly in between targets, not necessarily about launching rounds. In fact, one good way to train this when you're starting out is just to worry about the sight pictures and skip the trigger presses. Remember, when we're doing this, we want to try to get our eyes onto the preferred target zone, which is the A zone for us here, before our sight, which looks like this. I'm going to transition from the light switch to a picture on the wall. You can notice here that my eyes are only arriving on target a split second before the gun arrives there. You can also notice that my gun and body aren't waiting for my eyes. If I know that my preferred target area is somewhere over here, I'm not going to wait for my eyes to find it for my body to move. I know it's in this direction, my eyes are going to go over there and find that preferred target area, but in the meantime, my body's already en route to that location. The only time this would be different is when you don't know where the target necessarily is and you're looking around for it. For example, there's an old mantra in the tactical world about situational awareness that goes something like this. Did I hit him? Did it work? Does he need more? Legally, morally, and contextually. And then, do any of his friends need some as well? If I see something, my eyes are on it and then my body moves. That may be a circumstance where our eyes are quite far ahead from our body, but generally speaking, our body's already moving to that area that we know we need to be in. Now let's add some trigger presses into this. When we're starting out with this, we can break it down so it's a little bit simpler and get a sight picture on one target and trigger presses on the other, or trigger presses on one and a sight picture on the next, like so. And then all together it looks something like this. If you watch this clip again, you can see a bad habit of my eyes leaving the target early before I've landed all my rounds. That starts pulling the rounds in the direction where my eyes went to. It's called trailing off. You can also trail onto a target when your eyes have reached the next target but you fire early prior to your gun meeting the focal point of your eyes. Most of these misses in target transitions can be attributed to where our eyes are at the time of firing and how patient we are with the match and sight picture. You might have noticed that as I'm transitioning across to the next target, I'm not waiting for a sight picture to end up in the middle of the A zone to press the shot. Remember, this entire preferred area is worth the same value. If a round ends up here, or a round ends up in the center, they're both worth the same value. As soon as my sights have entered that preferred target area, I'm pressing the shot so that my next shot can be delivered even quicker. This obviously is not our preferred outcome. We would like both of our rounds to end up into the A zone as our sights move into that area. However, you may notice that as you start to push the speed of the transition drills, that your rounds may end up landing early as your sights enter the A zone. This is simply an indication that we want to be a little bit more patient on that sight picture entering the preferred target area, but this is not a horrible outcome and it's contextually dependent. Sometimes this is the outcome we do want because we're pushing speed to such a high degree. Conversely, if you start to see your rounds pushing past the preferred target area, you're likely transitioning the gun too aggressively, or you're not taking your eyes off of your sights. Sometimes when you do this, you will push past your preferred target area because you don't have that reference point that the gun is moving to. In regards to the aggressive transitions, just like we talked about that speed wobble at the end of an aggressive draw, we want to ensure that we're putting the brakes on at about the 90% point so our sights smoothly enter our preferred target area. Or alternatively, just slow down entirely. The difference between a smooth transition like this and a speedy transition may not be worthwhile depending on what you're going for in the context. If these targets are at a very far distance, it increases our likelihood of moving past the preferred target area if we come onto it quickly. It's also likely that the further the targets are downrange, the less our gun is going to have to move to transition. Conversely, if I'm at extreme close range to the targets, I may have to move more aggressively to kill the dead space between them. The next thing we want to go over is when do we start transitioning the gun in the recoil cycle. Like we talked about in the rhythm lesson, we are often waiting for our front sight post to drop back down into our rear notch before we place our next round. If we get good at rhythm, what we can do is we can use that front sight notch lifting to move to our next target underneath the recoil of the gun. What we don't want to see, because it wastes time, is this. Instead, what we want to see is that as soon as the shot breaks and the gun starts to recoil, we're going to use that wasted time and dead space to move to the next target, which looks like this. Instead of, one of the things that our rhythm drill can help us with is getting out of the habit of wasting time on target. For instance, let's place 2 rounds on each target using the rhythm 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Keep in mind that the sight pictures might not look accurate on this camera. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You can see that to maintain our rhythm, we have to move quicker through that dead space to ensure that on the number, our sight picture is going to be aligned to the next target. Then once we've got the hang of breaking off our sights quickly and moving through that dead space, we can pick up the rate of fire and try to maintain that rate of fire through the dead space, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's try that same speed with 3 targets. In theory, it shouldn't matter how many targets there are, as long as we're moving the gun underneath the recoil of the gun and in the dead space where nothing's happening anyway, we should be able to maintain that rate of fire across the targets. The caveat to this, however, is that you've obtained a rhythm where you're able to get the sight picture on every number. If we can do that, then we can use that dead space between the beats to move on the targets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Our first pair, the split was 0.25. The dead space was 2.6 transitioning. Split is 2.3 on the second target. Transition was 0.25, and my last pair was 0.21. And this is what it looks like at full speed. Our first split being a 1.7, transition a 1.8, second split is a 1.5, transition is a 1.6, and our last pair is a 1.5. It's not often, however, that we're going to be able to use a perfect rhythm like that across an array of targets, because in real life and in competition, they're not set up evenly like that all the time. We also have to remember that the relationship between the dead space and our rate of fire on that specific target isn't always going to be proportional for us to do that. It is, however, a very good drill to run so that we can remember to get off our sights quickly and to move through the dead space fast. With a timer, it also gives us a reliable metric to ensure that we're not wasting time on the target and we are moving through the dead space quickly. On the other hand, your rhythm and cadence won't assist you in situations like this, when the dead space between the targets is going to be proportionally greater than the rate of fire that you can sustain. For example, if I am standing this close to the targets and I have this much space to cover, I can shoot both of these targets as fast as I can pull the trigger and maintain my accuracy in the A zone. However, the dead space between the targets is going to take longer than my double tap on the targets, meaning that I can't use my rhythm of 1, 2, 1, 2 and keep that consistent across the dead space, which would look like this. My split in my first double tap was a 0.16. My transition across the dead space took 0.25. And then my double tap was 0.15. Now, like we talked about earlier, with transitions not only being with our gun, but with our body, there are times that we're not able to transition completely with our gun and we're going to have to move our body to get into position. The same concept applies of moving through the dead zone quickly, whether we're moving our gun through the dead zone or we're moving our body and beating feet. As soon as that round has left the gun, we should be moving to our next position so we can obtain a sight picture quickly. Whether our transition is physically from position to position or only with our eyes and gun, we always need to be moving through that dead space as fast as possible. And with that, let's get out to the range and see how our body can assist us in transitioning the gun quickly. Howdy. I don't got my mic on because it's raining out here, but I want to show how the body can help us transition on our targets. The biggest thing we want to try to get out of the habit of is doing a tank turn, meaning our upper body moves without our lower body. That's going to do two things. It's going to cause unnecessary muscle tension as I'm fighting against my body wanting to go in that direction, and it's going to slow me down. What we want to try to do instead is, if we have a large dead space or transition area, is to use our hips to get us to the target. So if I'm shooting here and then I need to go there, again, my eyes see it first and I move the hips towards that. You can see my toes are kind of pointing, well, you can't see that actually. You can see that my toes want to point towards the target as well, and if I transition back, I can just keep twisting the whole body that way. Something else you can do that's easier than fully swinging your hips around is to actually just load one of your legs. So again, if I'm shooting in this direction and I need to do a wide transition over, I can load this lead leg and move my weight into it to push my body over to the other side. Turning with our hips also helps keep our upper body stable and in the same position. You'll see if I do a tank turn on a wide transition without my hips, having a hard time keeping them straight, my upper body twists and is now out of alignment with my hips. Conversely, if I let my hips twist, my upper body stays in the same alignment with my hips, and it allows me to keep that same stable shooting position and move quickly.
Pay attention to my hips and butt here as we move back in distance. My hips will move less and less as the distance increases, but they do still move. Even at this range, they always try to stay in alignment with where my upper body wants to be to land a shot.
See, as we start backing up, that transition gets easier and we don't have to use as much of our body to move. Here are some examples using point shooting to show the maximum potential speed of moving through that dead space. Pay attention to how fast the gun is moving between targets and between the body and head of the target when applicable. Now, it is a bit unrealistic to think we're going to move literally under recoil while the gun is cycling on every transition. This is possible to do, but it requires extreme focus and premeditation to do so, meaning you have to know you're going to transition hard and then commit to it as soon as you're breaking the trigger. This is a bit extreme at close range and much more necessary to stay competitive, but even at distance, there is no need to move your gun slowly to the target, especially because it generally takes longer to confirm a sight picture at distance, and you will benefit from the extra time on target to do so if you get there sooner. The reason why we want to move through that dead space so quickly is because if you shoot sooner, you don't have to take as much of a risk of shooting faster. If I arrive on target sooner than another shooter, and the priority is speed, I can land my shots quickly and be ahead on time. Conversely, if the context dictates accuracy, I can take a larger amount of time on the target and get higher accuracy on the target before moving on. With all things in the shooting world, the context drives the action. Now that we've got all the tools to shoot quickly and accurately, we need to invest the time into making these tools readily available to us by putting in the work. Now, if you're serious about becoming a high-level shooter, you need to do the things that high-level shooters do. Those things are simple to do, but not easy. Dry fire can be monotonous and dry, but it's this focus on the simple things like perfecting your trigger press and sight acquisition that create a phenomenal shooter. So let's make that happen.